This is the Accounts Payable and Purchase Order webinar. So in File, Accounts Payable, Vendors is where you would enter and maintain any vendors. You come up to an existing record in our system, which is a record that already is out there for an existing vendor. You could change things on this vendor if you wish to, or you can add a new vendor by clicking the plus key. If you click the plus key, it brings you up to a blank screen. And on the blank screen, then you could enter in a vendor ID, but the vendor ID cannot already exist. So for example, we already have a vendor 10, and it will give you an error and say that the value of this field must be unique. So if I don't know what value I could put in there, and I need to know what vendors I have out there, I can look up in this little vendor list here. It's going to keep giving me an error about that vendor ID, and I can see what my vendor IDs are. So I can see that I have several used, but I've got between 10 and 20 available, between 20 and 50, and I can also use alphanumeric. So I can have the part of the name of the vendor. And if I have two vendors with the same name and I'm using names, then you would have to do like Concrete 1, Concrete 2, or put something on the end of it or in front of it to make it unique. So in this case, I can say I'm going to enter vendor 30, and just type in the name. I can type in an address. My city, if I want to, I can just type in my zip code that I know, and it'll automatically default my city, state, and my area codes for that zip code. And then I can fill in my phone number information. Contact would be, of course, your contact person. Email would be the email if you have it, and if it's a legitimate email, it will show up in the blue font or blue coloring, and you can click on that and it would open up your email program automatically. Same with the website. If I put in a legitimate website, it will show up in the blue font, and if I click on it, it will take me to jobcost.com's website. You can track whether a customer needs to have an insurance certificate. If this is checked, you can enter an expiration date, and you can say that the insurance expires whatever date it does. And then it will give you a message when you try to enter an invoice for this customer, or try to pay a check for this vendor rather, and it will give you a message that the insurance certificate is expired, and so that will tell you you need to get that renewed from them. We also have a crystal report that will give you a listing of insurance certificates and their expiration dates for each vendor. On page 2, you have information, additional information you can store. For example, if this vendor happens to have a parent company that they're going to bill through, you could put in a billing vendor ID. So that parent company would also have to be set up as a vendor, and you could put it in there to track where the bills will come from for this vendor. You can default a purchase general ledger account number if you wish to, and enter that here as to what GL account number you want that to use. You want to be used for this vendor. Now, if I want to see what my choices are in certain fields, I can hit an F12. The F12 key will bring up a list of what that field is expecting to find. In this case, is expecting a general ledger account number. So it's bringing up a list of my GL account numbers. And then I can either type and seek in here, and I can look for something called purchases, or I can go over, and if I know the number, I can type in the number. I can decide what I want to put in there, and it will populate. Not every field, of course, has that. Like billing vendor would bring up a list of my vendors if I hit the F12 key. And that's not working, so. The federal tax ID is where you would store their federal tax ID number if they were a 1099 vendor, you would need to put a federal tax ID in there. We have 1099 code selections down here where you can select what box their amount would go into. Most used is a non-employee compensation for like your subcontractors. If you use departments, you can put a department on this vendor. You can track their account ID for your company, whatever your account number is. You can have a purchase contact, which may be different than the contact on the first page. It's a second option for contact. You can have shipping, which way that you normally would ship, and your shipping terms and your billing terms. If they offer you a discount, the discount percentage would be here. And you can choose either to have a number of days for the discount or a discount day of the month. Tax status, if this has there's different tax statuses that you can choose from depending upon which this vendor would fall under. Days until due, when you enter an invoice, it can automatically calculate a due date for you based on either days until due or due day of the month. So in this case, this vendor is set up to go to the due day of the month is going to be the 30th. So any invoice I enter, the due day is going to be the 30th of the month. The 1099 code box, if it happened to be a 1099 vendor. Adjustment amount, if you needed to make an adjustment, or if you had state income tax or state tax withheld or state income to report for this vendor. Miscellaneous code is just informational. It can be pulled onto Crystal Reports, but it doesn't really print anyplace else in our system. The check detail, this is what prints on your check stub. If you do an F12 here, you have two options. The first option is invoice, which is print invoice totals only, which means it's one line per invoice. The line item option is to print distributions, which means it's going to show every job and every phase for this. It's going to show every distribution line item, every job, every phase on the check stub that this invoice went to. That is a more information on the check stub, but it's also more helpful for your vendors so they know exactly what you're paying. The Notcha tab is if you have our electronic payment module, you would set up your bank's information here, or the vendor's bank's information here, sorry. You would be the vendor's bank information for electronic payments. ESP is not active in this company, but it's another type of electronic payment. And then you have notes and user fields. These user fields can be, these are all headings that can be changed. For example, it's, this one says start date and this text one says tax ID. So it's a place to track additional information that we may not have a spot for on our other tabs. When you're done entering a vendor, you can hit save, and it saves it as a new vendor. On Accounts Payable Invoices is where you would enter a new invoice. And again, it brings up a live record that is in your file. This is an older invoice from 2016. You can see that checks have been written for this invoice because it says here in red, and it's taxable. Now to enter a new invoice, you would hit the plus key. If you were using our purchase order module and you had a PO that was attached to this, you could type in a purchase order number. If I hit F12, I can bring up a list of purchase orders, and I can select the one that I want. If I do select a purchase order, the vendor ID automatically defaults from the purchase order. And this is the message I was talking about where it says the insurance certificate has expired for this vendor. A current insurance certificate is required. Please check the vendor. So it will still allow you to proceed, but it's just warning you that you need to get a current insurance certificate on file. You can hit OK and go past this. You can put in a invoice number, invoice date, Now the invoice amount is going to default in from the purchase order. And that will make entering your invoice a little easier because you don't have to enter an amount if you're receiving everything on the purchase order. This vendor has a 2% discount on his file, which automatically defaults in. I can change this if I want. I can go to 1% and it's going to calculate it. I can say I'm not taking a discount this time, and I can zero out my discount because the bill's late, or I haven't paid it, or I'm not eligible for a discount on this particular purchase. So my next step, if I'm using the purchase order module, is to receive PO items on this button here. That will take me then to the purchase order screen. And then on the purchase order screen, I can see the items that I need to receive yet on here. So I can receive the items by clicking this button right here under the REC column. And I can say I'm going to receive that. And then I can receive each of these if I wish to. Now, if I want to change what I've received, I can do that as well. And that would unreceive it, so I didn't want to receive that one. And if I say OK here, it's going to ask me if I want to save my purchase order changes. I say yes, and it's going to take me back to my invoice. Now on my invoice, it's brought in my detail lines from my purchase order. So on the detail lines from my purchase order, it's defaulted in if I had a job and a phase and the account numbers. It also brings in the sales tax item as a separate line item. Now, if I look at my invoice amount and then I look at my total here, it doesn't look like it's going to balance. If I try to save this, it's not going to let me save it because my distribution amounts do not equal my invoice amounts. So if I go back to receiving PO items, I can see that I do need to receive that. Now if I say OK, do you want to save changes again? I say yes. Now it comes back. Now it's brought it here. It's brought these in multiple times, and now I've got too much. So in this case, what I can do is I can delete these original line items just by hitting the double minus key, highlight the line that I want to delete the double line items. And now my amounts down here match my amounts here. And then I could save it and it would save it. I'm going to go through this. I'm going to delete this and go through this one more time the clean way so that you can see that it would flow a lot easier. I'm going to delete that. I'm going to remove the AP invoice number from the purchase order, yes. So now, if I want to do this again, put in my date, receive my purchase order items. This time I know that I want to receive everything on the purchase order, so I can either click individually or I can just say receive all. And if I receive all, it goes through and it puts my invoice number out there. Once your invoice number is out there, then your received quantities and dates are filled in, then the purchase order has been received. And I want to say yes. So now here it has brought in all my detail lines. So now I don't have to enter all these. It automatically defaults. I'm going to change my discount because I decided that I didn't deserve a discount on this particular purchase, or wasn't authorized to take the discount. And then I can save it. So that saves me time from having to type in all these, add all these line items to just having them default in from the purchase order. So if this purchase order had retention, and if this one of these jobs had retention on it, these are both the same job. If this job had retention, you would enter retention on here. So if I wanted to add retention, this job must not have retention on it. So let's enter a new one to our new vendor. And let's see what we got out here for jobs. So I'm doing an F12 in that field. And I could look at a job. And I could put in retention here. Now, if I had retention on the job, it would automatically default if I was set up to have it withhold retention on AP invoices. So at the time that you enter the invoice is when you would normally enter the retention on the job. Now, the retention, the retention would normally not go on the purchase order screen. It would go just onto the invoice itself. So the retention would be entered on the invoice screen and not the purchase order, because that has nothing to do with retention. So now I say I have my invoice entered here with $10 of retention on it for a net invoice of $90. I can print a check directly from this invoice screen by clicking this print check button. This print check button will only print a check for one invoice at a time. It cannot do multiple invoices. So if I just need just this invoice to be paid, if I print the check, it will bring up this screen and it'll default my cash general ledger account number that I have stored in my control file. It will default in my next available check number from what the computer thinks it is. I can change that if I want to, if my next check number is different than what defaults. You can also change the check date, counting month and year. And if I say OK, it will go to the screen so I can see that it's giving me the job and the phase, the invoice amount, showing me the retention, and that I'm paying them $90. Now that I've written a check, this now says checks written. If I want to, and you notice it's all gray and I can't change it anymore. If I wanted to copy an invoice, I could use the invoice copy feature. That brings up a little box that asks you, what do you want to copy the invoice to? So you got to create a new number. You could change the date. This is good if you have recurring bills, rent, or some other bill that you pay every month for basically the same amount. You could set up, you could copy the invoice, and you could copy them out into future dates. So you could set up a whole year's worth or 6 months worth of invoices if you want to for an invoice that you pay every month. If I say I want invoice 46, and I want to date it September. If I use my binoculars, I can find invoice 46, and it looks just like this invoice. Now I can change it here if I want to, and if this amount I want to change to something else, or I want to change the job or the phase. When you enter an invoice to a job and a phase, it has to go to a cost type. The cost types are previously been set up in your control file, and your drop-down list will show you the cost types that you have available for accounts payable, which is normally material and subcontract. The GL account ID normally defaults in there based on your control file as well, because it'll be a controlled account. So it won't allow me to click in here, and it won't allow me to change that because it's a job cost material and it's controlled. Now, if I change my cost type to subcontract and I tab over, changes my GL account ID to my controlled account for subcontracts. So here I have job cost subcontracts. So that the cost type controls what general ledger account number defaults in there. If I have an invoice that does not have a cost type on it, for example, this line item did not, I can put whatever account number I want in there because there's no cost type to control it. So here is one that is controlled by a cost type, the one we were just on. Now, if I were to remove the job and the phase, now I could do an F12 and I could pick any account I want, but I can't pick the 450 range or the 440 account because those are controlled. So I can only pick ones that are not controlled and put that in there. The descriptions on the invoice, if you have a description here, it's kind of informational, doesn't really print anywhere. Description in the detail section will print on the check stub. So if you somebody needs their account number, or somebody needs your tax ID number, or somebody needs something on the check stub, you could add that in the description and it will show on the check stub as long as you have your checks show by line item. If you do an adjustment to an invoice, the adjustments will show in red. So this red line here is an adjustment. So adjustment was made to this invoice. So if I wanted to make an adjustment, I would go to File, Accounts Payable, Adjustments. And in here, it would ask me which vendor do I want to do the adjustment for. I can also narrow down the amount of invoices I'm going to get on my screen if I enter a job. In this case, I'm not going to enter a job, though. And I have to have a transaction date, and it will default into the accounting month and year. So now this shows me the invoices that I have open for this particular vendor. It shows me my net invoice, my retention, and it gives me a column for adjustment and a column for retention adjustment. So this is how I would adjust retention if I wanted to pay retention for this invoice now. So I can adjust retention in two ways. I can click in the Adjust Retention column, and I can do a negative. Say I want to adjust $5 of it. I can do a negative amount to reduce the retention by $5. If I click Apply, it moves it and it adjusts the retention column here down to $5 because I reduced it by $5. If I want to add retention to it, say I want to add $2.50, I do a positive number and they adjust retention. And I hit Apply, and then it increases my net retention by $2.50 to $7.50. Now, the other way I can do, instead of clicking into each line and entering my amounts, the other way to do it is there's an Adjust Retention button at the bottom here. I can click that, and then I can say that I want to adjust retention to 0. I can set a new job retention. I can have a set amount that I want to adjust if I want to adjust off just a certain dollar amount, or I can set my remaining retention to be a certain amount. In this case, if I say I want to adjust retention to 0, I can click that button and it will remove all this retention. I say OK, my job ID in. Adjust retention to 0. Okay. So now it's going to automatically put in there the value of what's in my retention column because I said I wanted to adjust it all to 0. So if I want to zero that out, and let's say I go back into adjust retention for job 50, and let's say I want to put my retention percentage at 5, and I say okay, it's going to just take down 5% or down to 5%. It's going to automatically calculate what my adjustment should be based on what I've entered here. So if you click apply, then it adjusts that column. And then if I say okay, I can go back to the invoices. And then you'll see all my adjustments here in red. Because we took it off, we added it on, and we took it off again. Now, if I find that this is too messy, I don't want all these adjustments hanging out there, or I did these adjustments in error and I need to start over again, instead of piling more adjustments on top of each other, I can go to this delete all adjustments button, and it will delete the adjustments that are not posted or paid. So it's all unposted and unpaid adjustments are going to be deleted. And when I say yes, those 3 line items disappear and my invoice is back to where it was. I can now start over on adjustments if I didn't do it right. So the only way to remove retention from an invoice is to do an adjustment for it. If you need to change an invoice amount and the invoice has not been posted or paid, you could just come into the invoice and make the change. So this invoice has not been posted or paid. It does have the adjustment, but if I needed to change the dollar value on here, because I had it wrong, I could come in here and make it 150. If I wanted to change this adjustment, I could come in here and change that adjustment because it's not been posted or paid. And then I could save my changes. If I wanted to adjust this retention to be 15, I could do that. Now I could still delete this adjustment by using my delete all adjustments button, but I also have more options to change my amounts or my dates or whatever it is that I wish to change. To pay a large group of vendors, a large check run, you want to make a large check run, you pay a large amount of vendors, you would go into File Accounts Payable, Select Checks. In the Select Check screen, it is already populating this without giving me into my first parameter box, which means that the Select Check screen has already been opened. If it comes right to a screen where it shows you all the vendors, that means that somebody's already selected or started to select checks. So if I cancel out of here, and let's go into an invoice for Barnes. Okay, so for this particular vendor, instead of the message checks written, we have a message checks selected for payment. And this is all grayed out, can't be changed. That check selected for payment message means that the select check screen has been populated and it's locked down the invoice, so it can't be changed until somebody either pays a bill in the select check screen or until they exit out of the select check screen by clearing all the vendors that are listed there. So if you see check selected for payment, that means that the select check screen has been populated and it needs to be cleared if you want to make a change to this invoice. So I'm going to exit here. I'm going to go back into select checks. And to clear this screen out, I'm going to do a restart all. And this will clear all selected invoices. This is just a normal warning. You want to say yes. And it's going to bring you up to the parameters screen. And here you want to say cancel. When you say cancel, all those vendors go away and you get a blank screen. You say okay. Now if I go into invoices and I use my binoculars and I look at the Barnes invoice, now this invoice is all opened up. It's all white. I can make changes to it if I need to. A lot of times you'll go in to try to pay something and say, oh, this is not right, or oh, I just don't want to take this discount. I'm past my discount date, so I'm going to zero that out. I'm going to save it. Now I'm going to come back in and I'm going to select checks again. And then I'm going to come up to this screen and I'm just going to say okay this time to populate my checks. And now my discount is gone and I've got my invoices back out here. I can drill into this. I can see my open invoices for this particular vendor, and I can decide which ones I want to pay. So for example, if I want to pay this first invoice, but I don't want to pay the entire thing, I can click in the selected to pay column, and let's say I just want to pay $500. Oh, it's not letting me. I can't do anything there. So I have to drill into it one more time. Now there's another selected to pay. I have to be at the job phase level. And then I can say, okay, well, I want to pay that particular line item because it's $7.72. I want to pay that particular line item. But on this line item, I only want to pay $400. So if I want to make a partial payment, I have to be drilled in as far as I can be and go into the selected to pay, and then I can select my amount that I want to pay. Now, if I drill back up, then I know I can see my selected to pay. It's all on this one invoice. I wanted to pay that $4.99. No, I can't get in here, so if I want to change it, I got to drill back in to that level and then make the change here if I want to. And if I drill back up to the vendor ID level, you've got your amount here that you're going to pay. You've also got your retention amounts here. You can't pay a retention. You have to release the retention by doing the adjustment before you can pay it. So if I drill in here and I look at the retentions here, I can't change these. I can pay 180, but it won't let me pay the extra 20. Even if I try to change this, I can change it, but it's still not going to release the retention. So then I would create a negative dollar value on this invoice. So it's still only allowing me to pay the 186. Now you'll notice that there's a little thing that says image here. If I click on that, it will bring up a picture. In Accounts Payable, you can attach pictures to certain invoices if you need to. And in order to do that, I'm going to just say OK here. Once you're done selecting this and you say OK, then you would go into print your pre-check for payment report. say OK, it's going to show me what I had selected to pay. It's going to show me how many checks I need to load into my printer. And then I can go over here into print checks. And I go into print checks here. It will default again by next check number. I have an option to print EP vendors or non-EP vendors or all. In this case, I don't have any EP vendors, so I'm just going to leave it default to all. If you did have electronic vendors, it defaults a electronic starting check number that you cannot change. Internally keeps track of that check number. You can change your check date, load your checks into the printer, and print them. Now, on Accounts Payable Invoices, we do have these image tabs where you can attach an image. And it basically just has to be somewhere on your computer, and you could use this browse button to go out and find the picture. Sure. So this is the one that had a picture attached to it. And the images would stay here. And you could display the image by clicking on that tab. Or you could remove it here. So once I actually print checks, this check selected for payment flag would disappear because it would clear the select check screen out. Once you've printed checks, if you find that the checks didn't print properly, or something, a check got jammed, or you need to forgot to load checks, you can use a reprint checks feature where you can reprint a certain number of checks or a certain check range. So you can say from your beginning check number, which is the first check number that you want to reprint. The ending check number would be the last check number that you want to reprint. And then your starting check number would be your new, the check number that you want it to print to. Now, it could be the same as your beginning check number. So if for some reason the computer thinks it printed checks, but you didn't load the checks in the printer, the beginning check number would be equal to the starting check number, so that you would print to the same numbers that the computer thinks it printed to the first time. This can be useful if you need to change a date as well. You printed checks, but you dated them one thing, but you wanted them dated something else in the printer or in the computer. You could change the check date just by using the same beginning check number in the starting check number. So you're just numbering the checks the same, but you're just changing the date to be a different date. Electronic payment is another basically printing check screen, and it defaulting to the electronic payment vendors though. So this is a way just to print electronic payments. Basically does the same things as the print check screen does, but it's just a different way to get to it. Electronic payment email to vendors. You would have to have had an email set up on the vendor screen in the EP vendor section. And then it will ask you for a check date, so you can put in whatever check date you ran those checks for. Or you could put in a vendor ID range or an electronic check number range. And then it would send out the emails notifying your vendors that there's an electronic payment being made to them. Review void checks is where you can see what checks that you've already done, what you've already printed. On the review void check screen, you have in red here cleared. That means that it's part of your bank reconciliation and it's been marked as cleared. You also have posted to general ledger, which means that the month has been closed for this particular check. So December of 15 has been closed and the month has been posted. This particular check happens to be a voided check. It says void here in red. My amount is 0. My detail, everything is 0. So that means that this check still exists, but it's a $0 voided check. Now, you can either void a check or delete a check. If you void a check, it leaves the $0 check out here, and it's still attached to the invoices. So this invoice would still have, say, checks written on it because it has a $0 check attached to it, and you would not be able to make any changes to that invoice because of this $0 check. So what we normally recommend is that if you need to void a check, and because you want to change the amount of the invoice, you need to change something on the invoice, we recommend that you delete the check using the purple minus key up here. Now you can still delete this voided check, and that gets rid of the $0 check, frees up the invoice so you can make changes to it. If you just need to reissue the check the same way as it was before because the vendor lost it or it never, for some reason, got damaged and never made it to the vendor, and you just need to print it to a new check, you could void it and then just print it for using the same dollar values and just print a new check for that invoice and leave the voided check out here. But if you need to change the invoice, you would need to delete this check so that you could free up the invoice and make your changes. Now, a regular check that has not been posted or not been reconciled has the void check option right here. So if you click that option, it will zero all this out and make it a voided check. Or you still have the option to delete it up here on the toolbar. You can't change anything on the check. If you paid the wrong invoices, you would need to delete the check and start over again. You would not in that case, if you wanted to pay different invoices, you would not void it because it would leave it attached, a $0 check attached to those invoices. The positive pay module is a text file that gets created that you can send to your bank. It makes secure payments where the bank will not process any checks from accounts payable or payroll unless they're included in this direct deposit or this positive pay file that you send to them. So you would you create a text file for either AP or payroll or both. And payroll direct deposit checks are not included in this. It's just the manual paper checks that you would do that would be included. And then the bank would only process the checks that are included in this text file that you send to them. So this helps prevent fraud so that you can't have somebody accidentally getting a hold of your checks and cashing them because they wouldn't be included in one of these text files. Drill down is a way to see what each vendor owes you, how much you've done for all time with them, what retention's out there, and what their net open is. So if you want to look at detail, you would drill in on the left-hand side here. It's going to show you all the invoices and the jobs and what is open. And if you want to drill in further, this will show you job phase. It'll show you adjustments on here, invoice amount. If you drill in one more time up here on the left, this will show you the payments that were made. So if you want to try to see, well, when was this invoice paid? If you drill in all the way where there's no more green boxes with the black arrows on the left side, you get to the lowest level, it will show you the check, and then you can say what check number and what check date. So then you could tell when these were paid. Or it also shows you adjustments, and you can see when it was adjusted. And then to drill back up is always on the right side. You can also see the images from here. drill back up and then go into another one. And we'll show you when that was paid. Posting transactions is part of the monthly closeout. We have a checklist located in the Help menu. And one of the final steps is to post transactions for the month. When you check this box, close the month year, that is what advances your accounting month and year to the next period. So if I were to run this now, it would advance the current accounting period to be February of 2016. You do have to post and close in order. So wherever you're sitting at, you'd have to go forward month by month. You can't jump. I couldn't jump to October if I wanted to. I couldn't do that. Or I could do that, but I shouldn't do that because it will mess up the totals on your books. So in Help, under Visual Contract Help, is the checklists. And it does not work, of course. Okay, so in Help is the checklists under Accounts Payable, and that would show you the step-by-steps for closing out the month. Part of the closing steps is to run reports. And in Reports, Accounts Payable, you have your invoice edit, your adjustment edit, and your check register. These are all part of closing the month. When you run these reports, you basically would run it for the month that you want to close. Unposted only is automatically checked. And what this will give you is just a listing of all the invoices that you've done for the month. At the bottom, it gives you the totals. And these are the totals that you would use on your checklist. Now, you can also print these reports. In our software, you can print them to a PDF. So a lot of people don't want to print reports to paper anymore because they're trying to be more environmentally conscious. And you can print them to file. And then you could go out here and you could put AP invoice edit. You could put a month and a year. You can say OK, and then it would populate that in here. And if I say OK here, it would print it to a PDF file or an XLS file. In this case, it would print it to an Excel file if I do it this way. So then I could open it in Excel. Now, another way to do it, I just go to the screen, I can go to the printer, and I can select my cute PDF writer as my printer. And if I print that, it will come up with a PDF file that I could then decide where I want to save it. And I can put it in a folder that had all my reports for this month or this year, whichever way I want to do it. And then I could always access that report without having to reprint it or without having to waste paper. Accounts Payable drill down into reports is the same drill down as the file screen. It's just in two different places. The vendor list is just a vendor list, but it does have a nice feature where you can choose the option to print balances. If you print balances, the accounting month and year fields open up. So if I go in here and I can put in whatever date range I want, if I say OK, this is going to give me a vendor trial balance that shows me the billings, discounts, and payments made for each vendor for that date range. So I can run this for a year, I can run this for a month, I can run this for whatever date range that I want to. And it shows me what I've done with all my vendors. pre-check register is the showing what payments that you have. Now, if I uncheck this print only invoices to be paid, so it's going to give me all of my open invoices and not just my checks that I selected for payment. So if I want to look at a listing of everything that I owe, and I've populated my select check screen, I can then uncheck that box and it'll show me all the things that I owe so I can look through it and decide what I want to pay. Your adjustment edit is the same as your invoice edit, only it's adjustments only, and it gives you a listing of your adjustments for the month. You can also run this for previous dates. You can run your invoice edit report for previous dates if you want to see past invoices. Same with your check register. It's a listing of checks for the time frame that you select. It'll show you the discounts, total coming out of your cash. When you're doing the close the month step and you're running through the checklist and you're putting in your report totals, you want to use this net change in AP amount on the checklist from the check register. You do not want to use these totals because they're not exactly the right amount. This total is slightly different, and it's probably a combination of those two, but this is the total that you want to use for your net change when you're closing out the month. Agings, you can run at any time. There are also some aging steps on the closeout for the month. Vendor totals just gives you one line per vendor, gives you the totals, one line per vendor. You can get into many details, all the way down to phase totals. This is just job invoice totals, so it shows you each job, each invoice number, what job it was applied to, the dollar amount. Also gives you your percentages for what is owed and how old it is. The history report shows you all transactions, even those that have been purged. Purging is a step of closing the month where you would get rid of or purge out posted and paid accounts payable invoices. So they would no longer be available in file accounts payable invoices. They would be deleted from that area, but you would still be able to see them if you run a history report for that vendor. So if I were to run a history report for vendor 10, I would see, and I don't think anything's been purged from this company, but I would see everything for this vendor, not just my open transactions or my transactions that are showing in my invoice screen. I would see all transactions, even purged ones. This can show me invoices and payments. So here I've got my check and my invoices. Shows me what is due per phase, per job. Gives you a breakdown. Of all the transactions for this job and for this vendor and whatever jobs that you work for. 1099 forms you can print from our software. You have to enter the year and the amount. So if anything over $600, you're going to print a 1099 form for. This form will print on pre-printed forms. You have to have the pre-printed forms, which you can order from us. And this is set up to print in the correct spots. it's 2 pages per form, just like the W-2 is. And then it does give you it doesn't give you a total. It does not give you a total for total form. We do have a Crystal report that will print the 1096 form, which is the total form for the 1099. That's part of the Crystal reports program. Under Admin, Accounts Payable, you have your control file options. This is basically where you decide if you use unit price, discounts, or retentions. These are pretty much set up already, so you don't need to change these. This is also where you can decide how long you want to save invoices for, how long you want to before you purge them. We normally recommend, 12 months to 24 months, depending upon the size of your company. Some customers like to save less than that. Some like to save more. This also will show you what your current accounting period is. Again, that advances automatically, so you don't ever need to come in here and change that. It also shows you what your last month that you've purged. This gives you your control accounts. The only thing you would need to change back here is if you changed banks and you needed to change your cash account number that defaults when you print checks. If you get a new bank and you have to set up a new bank account, then you would come in here and you would change the cash payments GL account number to be whatever your new bank account number is in General Ledger. Same with the electronics payments General Ledger account number. If that changes as well, you would need to change that. I think I did the purging step here, which is part of the monthly close, is this step here, where you could select a date. It's going to automatically default to 2 months back from whatever your counting period is based on the control file. So under Admin Accounts Payable Controls, my purging was set to purge invoices after 2 months. So if I go in here, and it's going to purge through 10 of 2015. That is all that I can think of to show you in this. So that concludes the webinar for today. If you guys have any questions, you could go ahead and call, and we could answer any questions that you have. Does anybody have any questions right now? All right, well, thank you all for attending the webinar, and this will be recorded. It has been recorded. It will be available online. So this concludes the webinar for today. Thank you for attending.